Hey everybody, welcome to the Nothing Notable podcast. Me and Daniel sat down to talk about the upcoming Super Bowl this Sunday, as well as recap the NFL season that was. The season was a lot of fun, and I think this episode is a lot of fun as well. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. All right, so who you picking to win the Super Bowl, buddy?
Until things get really different with the Chiefs, until their roster changes dramatically, I'm going to be picking the Chiefs every single year. I know that's kind of boring to pick the Chiefs, but at the end of the day, they're that good that you can't not pick them. So I'm going to say Chiefs. I'm going to say Chiefs 34, Bucks 27. I think they make it a game, but at the end of the day, I'm just not going to pick against Patrick Mahomes. So I'm taking the Chiefs 34, Bucks 27. How about you?
You know, I'm going to go with the Bucks. Okay? And I thought long and hard about this, and before we got on, I said, I don't know who I'm picking. And as I've been sitting here, I've talked myself into the Bucks. These teams played earlier in the year. Tyreek Hill had 200 yards in the first quarter, which I was very happy with because I had him on DraftKings that day. Not a sponsor, but I wish it was. The final score of that game, I believe, was 27-24 Chiefs. And I think the Bucks this time, the Bucks ever since that game, they had their bye week after, they've kind of just hit this other switch where they have been just so much better, so much more efficient on offense. It just seems like all the parts are starting to click. And the X factor for me in this game is going to be Shaquille Barrett and Jason Pierre-Paul coming off the edge for the Bucks. The Chiefs' offensive line is solid, but it's also very depleted right now. They're not going to have their left tackle, Eric Fisher. They're not going to have their all-world right tackle, Mitchell Schwartz. And Todd Bowles has just done such a fantastic job with this Bucks defense. Vita Vea is going to be back in there, and I think that the only teams that we've been able to see cause a little bit of trouble with Mahomes are teams that can get pressure on them without bringing a blitz, that can get just a four-man pressure on them. We saw that happen with the Niners when they played them in the Super Bowl for 3.5 quarters. They were having a great game. And I think the Bucks are going to have the potential to do that in this game with those two-star defensive ends they have. So I'm going to go with the Bucks winning 28-24 over the Kansas City Chiefs. You talk about not wanting to bet against Mahomes. I don't want to bet against Brady either. It's kind of like, that meme where there's the two buttons and the guy's looking at them and he's sweating? It's that whole scenario going on right now. Yeah, this is a fascinating Super Bowl. It's not necessarily the matchup I wanted when the year started, but I think it's a very exciting, it's going to be one of the most, I think, memorable just matchups that we've had in our lifetime.
By the way, did you know that the Bucks are playing at home?
Did you know that when Tom Brady was starting in the NFL, Patrick Mahomes was a baby?
From the very beginning of the season, we heard these possible storylines, and now here we are with these storylines. So they've been talked to death, but they're great storylines, and that's what makes a good Super Bowl is these storylines. Now, I do want to talk about one storyline. I want to relate Patrick Mahomes to Russell Wilson for a second, because Russell Wilson also in his first 3 years as a starter went to 2 Super Bowls. Won the first one, and then the second one he played against Tom Brady. Patrick Mahomes now, 3 years as a starter, I guess it's 4th year in the league, went to a Super Bowl last year, won. Now he's going up against Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. So Tom Brady could be a dynasty buster. This whole, what I just said about the Chiefs never losing ever again, it could, that's how we felt about the Seahawks also.
Yes.
So I am talking out of both sides of my ass right now.
I didn't know you had both sides of your ass.
I had a little surgery done this week. What happens coming out of this game is so pivotal for the future of the NFL. I mean, not really the future of the NFL so much as the way that we talk about certain players and certain storylines. If Tom Brady wins, it's another notch in the belt. He's undisputedly the GOAT. And if he wins another one, what it really does is it makes everyone that said he was a system quarterback and that he could only win with Bill, it makes those people look like complete fools and idiots. And in that regard, it makes him even more GOAT status. And then if Patrick Mahomes wins, obviously he is literally on the same trajectory as Tom Brady was in terms of Super Bowls and in terms of winning percentages and the way that he just blew up so quickly, except he Pat Mahomes is even more statistically great than Tom Brady was. And so in that regard, it's going to be really fun. And the old versus young matchup, even though it's a very tired storyline, it's fun. It's cool. I like it. I'm happy with it.
It's cool. It's going to be a real passing the torch moment if Mahomes beats Brady in the Super Bowl. In more ways than one. You can talk about it from the perspective like Tom Brady was like the face of the NFL for so many years, and now it's Patrick Mahomes. But I think you can also discuss about it in this way that it's the passing of the torch from the old guard of quarterbacks who were the more pocket passers to this new wave that we're having of athletic, more improviser quarterbacks who can make plays outside of the pocket as opposed to inside of it. I shared with you that visual graph I saw the other day that was the release points of the throws that the 4 remaining quarterbacks in the championship games had, and Brady's was all like within the hash marks. Patrick Mahomes was all over the place. We're really seeing the NFL evolve into this new era where for a long time I think teams didn't put their best athlete at quarterback. And I think you're starting to see that happen more and more at younger levels too, which is translating to the NFL. And it's very exciting. I think it makes for very fun football to watch. Mahomes is special, man, which I'm obviously not the first person to say that, but you will watch Mahomes and you'll be like, oh, he's dropped back 20 yards and he's going to take a sack now. And then he ends up throwing a no-look ridiculous pass for a touchdown. It's so much fun. I love him so much.
Yeah, his presence in the NFL is one that I'm super happy about. Like I said, he did beat our Niners last year in the Super Bowl, and so that was devastating. But I still really like the Chiefs just as a team. I don't like Tyreek Hill for reasons that we've talked about before, and for reasons that you could Google. But other than Tyreek Hill, I really like this team. I like all the guys on the team. I like Kelsey. I like Mahomes. I like L'Jarius Sneed.
L'Jarius Sneed. Look, I want to say L'Jarius Sneed was one of my sleeper players in the draft this year on my big board that I made. Absolutely love the guy. The Chiefs got a total steal with him. Carry on.
Yeah, totally. He's going to show up in another category later.
Yes, sir.
But yeah, no, I totally agree. The passing of the old guard to the new guard is going to make the NFL just so much more fun going forward. And that's also why it wasn't so fun to watch Peyton Manning in his last few years. He's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, but he looks like a slug. He can't move. He can't do anything. And so I'm very happy with the success of the Chiefs is basically my point in this.
Yeah. I want to briefly talk about how the Chiefs got here.
Sure.
Because I think that is something that's just a wonderful piece of history people need to think about. We hear so much with the draft, like you got to build through the draft. And I think people only tend to think of that as you have to hit on your first round picks. You need to build through first round picks. I was looking at their roster and how they got the players they had. And since 2016, which was the year before they drafted Mahomes, they've had 2 first round picks. Patrick Mahomes and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That's it. If you want to go back to like 2013, they have Eric Fisher, who is the number 1 overall pick and has been fine, but not like what you think of as a number 1 pick, and Marcus Peters, who wasn't on the team like 2 years ago. I think fans tend to get caught up a lot with draft picks. I think fans fall in love with draft picks much in the same way that in baseball they fall in love with prospects, because the potential of what could be always seems like it's better than like what you have in front of you. Like if you think of a toaster, right? And you're imagining the greatest toaster you could possibly think of. As soon as you go out to the store and buy a toaster, even if it's the most highly rated toaster, it's not going to be as good as that toaster you were thinking of. It's going to still get like some crumbs in it. The heating on it's going to be inconsistent sometimes. It's still going to be like a little difficult to clean. And like that's I think how fans view like prospects and draft picks. Like they always want that as opposed to, selling the farm to get an established guy like Deshaun Watson, which we'll talk about later on. The Chiefs really recognize this, that it's better to trade your first round pick that's going to be at the bottom of the draft for a guy like Frank Clark, who has been pivotal to their team, to trade up to get Mahomes, who's a guy you love, as opposed to saving that first-round pick next year. And it's paid off for them. They're now in 2 straight Super Bowls for at least the next 2 years. While they have Hill and Kelsey and Mahomes all under contract, they're going to be at least in the AFC Championship game probably. I want to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think I'll start with baseball real quick, because I think baseball is the most egregious in this regard, because there's so many trades that occur where it's like you get 45 prospects for like
Let's
one
trade
incredible...
these 15, 17-year-olds for Mike Trout and hope one of them ends up making it to the MLB.
Exactly. It's not even like in the NBA where you trade James Harden for a bunch of like nickels and dimes on the dollar. It's like you're trading for pennies on the dollar and hoping that those pennies through alchemy can develop into a dollar bill. Like you're just really hoping. Now the one thing though that is important is not every team, if they embrace that philosophy, will hit on their second, third, fourth, fifth round picks, you know?
Absolutely. That's the key point of this.
So they also just have incredible they have incredible scouting department. They have an incredible player personnel department. They know what they want. And I think also a lot of that comes back to Andy Reid and how he has been in the NFL for so long and he knows exactly what he wants. And same thing with Bieniemy. Bieniemy knows exactly what he wants and needs for this offense to work. And so in a lot of ways, they're this perfect storm, this perfect amalgamation of scouting, personnel, coaching. All of it comes together and they're all in sync. In general, I do agree with that philosophy. I do think that first round picks are a little overrated. And up until a few years ago, the Patriots proved that as well. They missed on a lot of picks for a long time. And
the Seahawks have not hit on any of their first round picks for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and these are teams that are still competitive. And yeah, sure, if you hit on one of those picks, maybe you get a player that puts you over the edge, but also maybe you don't. So yeah, I definitely agree with that sentiment. I do think that especially fans are far too attracted to the shiny metal toaster.
What you said about having to hit on those later round picks, critical. And that's what the Chiefs have done so well the last few years. You talk about guys like Kelsey and Tyreek Hill and Chris Jones and L'Jarius Sneed, who we mentioned earlier, Mecole Hardman, like all these players who are just so critical to their team. Derek Nandi, who's a lovely interior defensive lineman for them. Willie Gay. You can just go down the whole list of people who they have drafted over the last 5 years who are, starters on their team. And that's what you need. You don't necessarily need everyone you pick to be a Pro Bowler. You just need them to be guys who can play football and play it at a high level.
You have to have, it's that combination of coaching and personnel and scouting. You have to know what you're looking for and you have to go get it.
So that brings me to my next question is, what do other teams in the AFC specifically need to do to go out and get the Chiefs? Like, is there a team that you think is, obviously the Chiefs are head and shoulders above everyone else. Do you think there's another team that with a couple of moves can maybe get there and get to that level where they're competing with them?
There's 3 or 4 teams. The 3 real teams that I'm thinking of all have problems, but I think that they're addressable problems. I'll start with the Browns first. The Browns were better than I wanted to give them credit for, and they were better than I think either of us expected.
They are coming up for me in another category.
Their problems, defense, they have some studs on defense, and the defense at times played exceptionally well, at other times played like doo-doo boo-boo. So they just need to shore up their defense a little bit more. And then the QB situation. Baker Mayfield played not great first half of the year, pretty good second half of the year. So credit to Baker Mayfield. Does he have enough to get over that hump? Does he have enough to get better? Is this what Baker Mayfield is? That's the real question. And so if this is his best, then no, I don't think you're going to beat the Chiefs. But the thing that the Browns do really well is they score points. They can do that. So that's the one thing is you have to be aggressive on offense when you're going against the Chiefs. You also have to be aggressive on defense. Like you said, manufacturing pressure, sending a linebacker to blitz and then pulling the defensive end off into coverage. Niners did this a lot during the Super Bowl. They did this a lot during the season last year. Still rushing 4, but making it look like you're rushing more. Stuff like that. And then on offense, you have to be able to score points. You have to be aggressive. We'll probably talk about the Packers' decision to kick a field goal instead of go for it. You have to throw field goals out the window, and you have to score points. The Browns can do that. Then I also have the Bills and the Colts. The Bills, they have weak run game. They have some defensive question marks. And then the Colts, they have just a QB problem. Their defense is really solid. And I think if they get the right quarterback, they can actually make quite a remarkably big step in the right direction. So those are the teams that I'm looking at that if they address their problems, they could probably, on the right day, put it to the Chiefs.
Yeah, I think the Colts are a very interesting one because I like a lot of what was going on there this year. I said it multiple times throughout the season that what was holding the Colts back was their quarterback. And not that Phillip Rivers was bad for them this year, but just that there's a ceiling there with him. The Bills are right there, man. There's just something just missing from them. Maybe it's another year of Josh Allen just getting more comfortable. He played great this year, but you still saw in that game against the Chiefs last night, some of the mistakes, still holding on to the ball too long and taking 15, 20-yard sacks when he didn't need to. Just trying to force balls into windows that weren't there sometimes. But if they can get like an actual run game, because they don't really got anything going on right there, even though I like their running backs that they have, I think Zach Moss and Devin Singletary are good running backs.
Yeah.
That would add a lot of balance to their offense. And then defensively, they just got to... Their defense was great in 2019, and then 2020 fell off a little bit. And I haven't fully dove into the reasons why looking back on it, but something was just a little off there this year. But yeah, those two teams I think are really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm excited to see because the Bills, they're ready. They were in the AFC Championship game. They are good enough to play in the Super Bowl. They just didn't have a great game.
I'm going to transition now to the NFC side of things because I expect the NFC to be much more open going forward. Unless the 49ers get Deshaun Watson and then it's over. But that was an interesting game last night between the Packers and the Bucs. The Packers were completely out of it. They were playing like the frauds that we have been saying they were all season long.
Yep.
And then Brady gave them 3 interceptions, but they only scored 7 points off of those interceptions.
Yep.
The big controversial moment of that game, there were some pass interference calls that were iffy, but the big controversial moment was Matt LaFleur having the MVP of the league, most likely, in Aaron Rodgers, down on the 9-yard line, down by 8, with a little over 2 minutes to go, and deciding to kick a field goal instead of going for it. Give me your thoughts on that.
Generally, I'm not too harsh on decisions like this, just because if your team, it's a situation where if you don't win the game, then you won't win the argument, obviously, because you've lost the game. So you can go back and then say, well, in hindsight, like that was a bad move. I think objectively it is a bad move to kick the field goal instead of go for it, because you have to take into account, there's all those spreadsheets that say do this, do that, but you have to take into account your personnel and you have to take into account the situation and who you're going up against. Like we were talking about with the Chiefs, you have to be aggressive on offense. If you kick a field goal, you're going to be down very quickly, because
which is what happened to the Bills yesterday too.
Exactly. They're going to go. You're going to score 3, and then they're going to go score 7. You might make a mistake. You might turn the ball over, and then they have another 7, and it's 14-3. And just like that, the game is over. And it felt like that with the Bills game. And so in this situation with the Packers, you do have the MVP of the league. Put it on his shoulders, because he's taken you this far. And if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out. But instead, what you don't want is questions of what if. That's what you don't want. And unfortunately, in this situation, that's what you get. I think they should have gone for the touchdown. If they don't get it, I wouldn't fault him for being too aggressive.
Yeah, hindsight is always 20/20. And speaking of hindsight, I'm sure there are some takes we had from the beginning of the season that we would like back. That's what we call a transition, baby. I want you to give me first your teams that surprised you most this year, your teams that you thought were not going to be as good as they ended up being. Let me hear them.
Okay, so first I just want to say that I'm so proud of myself for at the beginning of the season when we did the NFL preview pod, my list of teams that would be disappointing. I nailed it. I nailed it. I was so proud of myself for that. Every team on that list
fucked it up.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm going to take the Browns. And
yeah. But yeah, so I just wanted to, I wanted to fluff the ego before I take it back down. But obviously the Browns. Let's talk about the Browns.
Yes.
I said not only on the preview pod did I say that they were going to be bad, but on the midseason review show, when I did my little coda at the end, one of the takes was Cam Newton would be better at fullback. And and the other take was that the Browns are who we thought they were. They're going to show us their ass pretty quickly here.
You're batting 500.
Batting 500, so I'll take that. The Browns were a lot better than I expected. A lot of that is because Baker Mayfield played a lot better in the second half of the season. He played more efficient. I don't know why I hate the Browns. Like, it's funny. I like the Bills, and they're both the same team. Like, they both have sucked for so long, you know? And so I don't know why I root for one over the other. But it's just something in me. I don't know why. And that was the case with the Browns this time. And last year, there was a lot of hype about the Browns, and so I took that into this season when I shouldn't have. So credit to them. That's the first team that really surprised me.
Yeah, I'm going to tag on in right here because the Browns were also on my list of teams that surprised me this year. You know, I have been on the record saying I don't think Baker Mayfield is that great. And for the first half of the year, he was not very good.
No.
He was turning the ball over more. Not more, but about like at the same rate he was before. There's nothing was about him that was really like special, you know?
Yeah.
Part of that maybe comes with him being the first overall pick. Expectations are different for that as opposed to like a fifth rounder. Whole other topic. But in the second half of the year, Kevin Stefanski did a very great job of not making it so Baker Mayfield had to win games for them. The whole theme of the offense was basically get the ball to Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb, very well, I think you can make an argument, is the best running back in the league. I don't think that's that far of a stretch to say.
Sure.
He's definitely in that top tier of like three or four guys. And it was give the ball to Chubb and Hunt, have a strong run game. Their offensive line was fantastic the whole year. And then just don't turn the ball over, which is really like 90% of the time is what you need in the NFL. We're 49ers fans. We watched a lot of 49ers games this year that were lost because they turned the ball over so many times. It's when you turn the ball over, first of all, you're not giving yourself an opportunity to score. And second of all, you're usually giving the other team good field position. The Browns did not do that this year, and that led to them being successful. So props to them. Baker Mayfield somewhat proved me wrong. I still think there is a ceiling there. But if he can play like that, then good for them. That's going to give them a chance to win games every Sunday.
Yeah, and like we've talked about before, we want competitive football. We want to see everybody be good because that means that the product is going to be better. It's not worth your time to watch a bad sporting event. Like, it's just not. Switching to a different team that surprised me, Tua and the Dolphins. They ended up at 10-6. So that shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but it's just the nature of how they finished off their season and the way that Tua played. I always had my eyes on it. We talked about how huge of a decision it was for Flores to bench Fitzpatrick at the time that he did and start Tua. And we said that at the end of the season, when we did this podcast, we were going to come back to that moment and we were going to be able to say that definitively made or ruined the season. And what surprised me is it didn't. Shocked at how much of a non-factor that quarterback change was. They still end up 10-6, which is where they might have gone if Fitzpatrick had started the whole season. Who knows? You know, that's a guessing game. But the surprise is in the lack of surprise, in a way.
Yeah, the Dolphins were also my other pick for my most surprising team of the year. That defense was very good this year. They did a great job of forcing turnovers, which is what we just talked about. The Browns did a good job of not giving up. Xavier Howard is maybe one of the most slept-on players in the NFL. The man had 10 interceptions this year.
Yeah.
10 interceptions. That is a big number. You see guys who have like 3 or 4 interceptions, you're like, oh, pretty good season for him. This man's out here taking the ball away like every single week. This was a team that was supposed to be like a 3 or 4 year project. They were more competitive in games last year than people thought they were going to be, with the front office just really trying to tank. And then this year, they had no business being a 10-6 team. Like, none at all. And a lot of his struggles, I think, come from the fact that he had literally no weapons out there, especially when Devontae Parker was hurt. He's throwing to guys like Jakeem Grant, who's just a return man, and Mac Hollins. Like, these are not, like, starting caliber NFL receivers. The grade on Tua, I think, is an incomplete if you're grading them this year. Yeah. Because we didn't really get to see him, like, to his full ability. I think they also played, like, very conservative with him. The game plans were not very elaborate. They didn't really take a lot of shots. But overall, I think the Dolphins have a bright future ahead of them, especially considering they have the 3rd overall pick in the draft this year, which they can do a number of things with. Good on them. Brian Flores deserves a lot of credit for what he's done with that team. Gets his guys to buy in every single week.
Do you want to go to teams that disappointed us or players that surprised us?
Yeah, let's go to the teams here. Which teams really bummed you out this year?
I'll start with a less obvious one, the Panthers. They finished the season 5-11. They started the season kind of well. I was bummed out by their performance. I expected them, and I expected the Falcons also. I guess I'll keep those two as one.
Your NFC South disappointments.
Yeah, it was just kind of disappointing. I expected specifically the Panthers. I expected them to be more competitive than they were. We're big Teddy Bridgewater guys, and he had a fairly efficient season. I think he completed like 70% of his passes. For how decent they started, they just didn't finish the season as well, and that was disappointing. I was kind of hoping that they'd be able to do better, but they didn't.
For me, my number one disappointing team that I have on here were the Eagles.
Yeah, me too.
The Eagles were bad this year, like almost from start to finish, just objectively not a good football team. And I understand they had injuries, but just from the construction standpoint, the team did not work. Nothing on this team worked. The defense was getting toasted every week. The quarterback play was horrendous. Carson Wentz, I don't know what happened to him, but he was the worst quarterback in football this year when he was playing. It was one of the more shocking things for me, because I understand the Cowboys being bad because Dak got hurt. I think if Dak's not hurt, the Cowboys are a lot better team than they ended up being. But the Eagles really didn't have a reason to be. I think they finished 4-12 or something like that.
4-11-1.
4-11-1. That's right. Should have known it was going to be a down year for them when they tied week 1 against Washington. If you told me that all it took to win that division would be 7-9, I would have absolutely thought the Eagles would be the first place team, not the last place one. Just a really awful year for them. Doug Peterson's gone now. I don't know what the future holds for them. I think it's one of the more undesirable jobs because of the quarterback situation. So best of luck to their new coach that they got.
It's undesirable because of the quarterback situation, but also because of what's been coming out about the ownership. Everything.
There's a real struggle there between the head coach and then Howie Roseman, their GM. Like, you can't have that and expect your team to be successful. You need to have that marriage work. That's the most important relationship in your football team.
With Carson Wentz, I didn't expect him to play this bad. You sent me a thing earlier this year. It was an article about how maybe, like, the hot take was like, maybe Carson Wentz was always bad. Not this bad, but always bad. Mm-hmm. And the stats that they pointed to, I'm not sure if we talked about this already in a previous pod, but
I don't know if we did. But
the stats that they were pointing to was like in his MVP run season, he was remarkably efficient in the red zone, and that was the one year that he was remarkably efficient in the red zone. Ever since then, he has not been. And so if you take those numbers out, it was kind of an aberration because of their incredible efficiency in that one year. So I think Carson Wentz kind of fooled us all. I think he could still have success somewhere else possibly, but there is a ceiling. So he wouldn't be a guy that I would put ahead of Deshaun Watson or Dak Prescott or
Absolutely
some of these
not.
Other quarterbacks. He's owed a lot of money. You and I were
both a whole
both
bunch of money.
You and I were both big on Jalen Hurts coming out of the draft, so that's good. He played well. I don't think he played exceptional, but again, it's sort of like Tua. It's almost like an incomplete grade.
He only played like 3 games, I think. But
yeah, and then there's the incredible decision to bench him at the end of the season.
Don't get me started.
I mean, just remarkable. But yeah, so I totally agree. The Philly thing is just It was just horrendous. The whole division was an abomination. It was so sad. It's not enjoyable to watch because these guys are not having fun on the field.
The Eagles were not fun to watch. I did not enjoy watching any of those NFC East matchups. And it sucks because those are all big brand teams that the NFL loves shoving down our throats.
Yeah, it was almost as miserable as watching our Niners.
Oh, man.
Which is just so sad. But yeah, the rest in peace to the Philadelphia Eagles. They've got great fans, so I really want them to be successful.
Their fans care so much. They're really in it. My other disappointing team this year was one that was on your list to start the season, and that was the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah.
The Viking season really was divided into two halves. It seemed like the first half of their year, things really were not clicking whatsoever for them. I can't remember what they started, but I think it was like 1-4 or 1-5, something like that. But then they ended the year, like they had a good stretch in that middle of the year where they won 4 out of 5. And then they ended the year dropping 3 of 4. It was a team that really was just not consistent the whole way through. Kirk Cousins played okay, but again, he's another one of those guys where it's like, you can win games with him, but not because of him. I don't know what that team does moving forward. I'm a little bit surprised that Mike Zimmer is still around there. Not that I think he's a bad coach, but it just kind of seemed like one of those situations where it's like, okay, it's time for a change now.
It is sort of a Marvin Lewis situation where it's like, like it's hard to find another coach. So we're just going to stick around with this one. Dalvin Cook was able to show off how damn good he is this year, which was, when you have a team that's not very good, there's usually bright spots like you talked about Justin Jefferson and Dalvin Cook and Thielen and company. And so he was able to shine so well, and he was a huge reason why they went on that big winning stretch. And there was a lot of talk that if they were able to put together a winning season at the rate that Dalvin Cook was going at, he could be an Offensive Player of the Year, MVP type candidate. That doesn't ultimately end up happening, but kudos to him. And I like the Vikings, and I want to see them succeed. If we're just looking forward to next year, I'm not sure what they have to do to get better. I'm not that intimately familiar with the Vikings roster and who's going to be leaving, who has been re-signed. They could go 7-9. They could go 12-4. I don't know. I feel like in the first half of the year, they just got caught on the worst day of the week.
What about you? Do you have one more disappointing team for us?
The Niners.
The Niners, yeah.
Yeah. We don't have to spend too much time. We'll talk about them a lot in the off-season pod because that's where most of the interesting stuff is what they're going to do going forward. But I do just have one quick take on the Niners, and that's that this season proved the value of backup quarterbacks. When the Packers drafted Jordan Love, there was a lot of criticism about that. The reason that there was criticism is because they didn't have wide receivers. They didn't have a lot of other positions. So that particular example, it's not a great example, but it's good to value a backup quarterback in that way. Because if the Niners had a decent, competent backup quarterback, they would have been fighting for the playoffs this year. Robert Saleh had his guys on defense fighting so hard, and they were still a top 10 defense despite losing Nick Bosa, and despite losing Solomon Thomas, and despite losing Richard Sherman for most of the year, and basically every other player that was on the defense. And the offense at times was you could see that it was possible for it to be clicking, but then Nick Mullins or CJ Beathard throw an absolute, bewilderingly bad interception. I never went into a game when Nick Mullins was starting thinking that they could win that game. I was so dejected the whole season. I felt sick to my stomach every morning. I woke up and I thought, oh God damn it, I have to watch the Niners today. So that was really tough. But if they had a decent backup quarterback, we still would have been a good team. And so I just think I think that's important to consider. I think a lot of teams or a lot of fans, they don't realize the value of having a decent backup quarterback, because if we had one, we'd be very good, especially because we played so well in our division. We really gave it to our division rivals. So I don't know. I think that's the thing I came away with from this season.
Yeah. If the Niners had, guys like Tyrod Taylor or Case Keenum or, Nick Foles, like someone like that, they're a playoff team this year. I think that's absolutely correct. It was a very sad year. Made me sad every single Sunday. Yeah, they have I think they have the most interesting offseason of any team, and we will cover that in the future. What about we talked about teams? Give me some players who really surprised you this year. Who are you really happy about?
It's the whole rookie class.
Yes.
This was such a good rookie class. I mean, unbelievable the amount of immediate stars and superstars that were born out of this class. Justin Jefferson, obviously, we talked about him a little bit, but just the production that he put together for a rookie is unbelievable. He had something like, I don't know, it was like 88 receptions and 1,400 yards or something. So, that, especially because the wide receiver class was so deep, it was kind of like, okay, is CeeDee Lamb going to be the guy who you could basically pick like any one of those wide receivers, and you could have said at the beginning of the season that will be the one who's the best wide receiver. And a lot of people believe that about Justin Jefferson also, but I think that the way that he separated himself was really impressive. And that's no discredit to the other incredible wide receivers also. Brandon Ayuk, Lamb and Judy and onward and upward, all literally the entire class, just stunning. We also talked about L'Jarius Sneed, heck of a find in the 4th round. I mean, how important is he to this Chiefs defense? A defense
Huge.
that isn't and wasn't great. He's able to shore up a side of the field now in coverage, and he's able to make incredible plays on the ball. So that's like such a huge find for them. And then lastly, Justin Herbert. We wrote him off.
We messed up that one.
That was I thought it was going to be a given. I said, don't draft Oregon quarterbacks. Now I have to look back at that. But yeah, so Justin Herbert really surprised me. The future is bright for him. So I apologize to him, and I'm in awe of this entire rookie class.
Yeah, this was the first year. This draft was the first year that a lot of it was due to COVID and having so much time on my hand that I really like dove in to draft stuff and was like watching film of like dozens and dozens and dozens of players. I ended up making a top 100 board at the end of the, like right before the draft with like my notes on them and all. It was so much fun, and I'm so glad that this draft class lived up to the hype. There were good guys all throughout the draft. It's actually, I think, one of the best drafts that we've seen in the last, maybe 5-10 years or so. Justin Herbert was my big guy who was a surprise to me. I am on the record. It's recorded. You can hear it in the preview pod of me saying, I think Justin Herbert stinks.
Yeah.
That was absolutely wrong. And it taught me a lot about evaluating players, to not so much look for necessarily what they did in college, because a lot of that is scheme based. Like they at Oregon were having him throw lots of short passes, but we could all still see that he had the arm talent. They just weren't using it. So it taught me to really more so look for tools in players and how you can use them as opposed to how they were used. And he was phenomenal. I think he's a huge bright spot for the league. Getting to see him and Mahomes go off against each other twice a year for the next few years.
I mean, I pretty much went through all my surprise players, but I'll add one more, and that's Josh Allen.
There you go. Same one.
The thing that people have been saying for so long is that you cannot change completion percentage. If you throw 56% completion percentage in high school, you will do it in college, and you will do it in the NFL. That's what every scout has always said, is that's the thing that doesn't change. If you're accurate, you're accurate. If you're inaccurate, you're inaccurate. Josh Allen proved that that's not true. He just got so much more efficient. And so in that way, and in that regard, was very surprised. I expected him to do well. I think he was a player that we talked about in the preview pod. Even though I thought he had the potential, I didn't think he was going to be an efficient quarterback. I didn't think that at all, and now here he is. So again, good job, Josh Allen. You're my guy.
Yeah, Josh Allen was my other guy who really surprised me this year. Same as you. I thought that like we could all see the potential was there for Josh Allen, and I think we talked about this in our preview episode, that we could all see the potential was there. We could see that he has the big arm, he has the legs, he can make all the plays. He would make plays every now and then that make you go, wow, what did I just watch? And then he would make you plays that go, what did I just watch, in a very confused manner. And I think we saw him like realize his potential this year. And I think getting Stephon Diggs was a great addition for them, getting him that true number one guy. Hats off to him. He did a phenomenal job this year. And the AFC, in contrast to the NFC right now, has lots of very fun young quarterbacks, whereas the NFC has lots of these old men who are on their way out. And it's fascinating because the AFC is also going to be getting Trevor Lawrence next year. They're probably going to be getting someone else with the Jets, whether that's Fields or Zach Wilson. I'm excited. The AFC is going to be very fun for the next few years.
Absolutely. Do you have any more surprise players, or do you want to switch over to disappointing?
Let's get sad. Let's go to the disappointing players.
Okay. I'll start with Cam Newton. Cam Newton, we were kind of
bullish on him. We were bullish, optimistic.
We thought that he could do something. I think also I just let myself get tricked by the NFL media. There was just so much time to talk about what could happen here that every media guy in the NFL was saying, like, guess what? Bill has always wanted a quarterback like this, and now he's got one, and now Bill's going to go nuts. And that was kind of my belief also, was like Bill's going to unleash something that had just been laying dormant for so long because Tom Brady couldn't move his legs. And it was funny is at the beginning of the year, Cam actually looked pretty good.
You remember that week 2 game against the Seahawks?
Yes.
Incredible.
Yeah, he played really well. He looked like Cam Newton of old, and so it's like, okay, here we go. Then he gets COVID. He's out for a minute there, and he comes back, and he can't throw more than 15 yards. Like he's skipping balls into the feet of receivers on almost every throw. I said he'd be better at fullback. His passing season was actually I think just one of the worst seasons that I've ever seen of a quarterback. There's obviously a ton of worse quarterback play, but in terms of what he could be, what he was at one point, and what he ended up doing this year, it was just so disappointing. And it looks like it's over. He's got the heart of a champ, and he's not going to give up on himself. So maybe he goes somewhere else. Maybe he turns it around. But it just seems like it's a physical issue. I don't trust his shoulders anymore. I think he's just been beaten and bruised so bad that he can't do this for much longer.
I just pulled up his numbers this year because I wanted to take a look and see what they were. He had 4 games this year where he threw under 100 yards. And those weren't like, Jimmy Garoppolo games like in the NFC Championship where they're just running the ball so much that they don't need him to throw. He threw 8 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, and that number of touchdowns seems bad until you realize 3 of those touchdowns came in the last game, and then it's even worse than you thought it was. I will always think of Cam Newton as that player during their, heyday with the Panthers, during that Super Bowl run, his MVP season, where he was just like bigger and faster than everyone else, with a just ginormous arm, his big arms.
Big arms, that's what we're all about here.
Big arm guy. This is a pro big arm podcast. And it was one of those things like where it kind of reminded me of, watching Peyton Manning his last year in that same Super Bowl nonetheless, where you're like, this is a shell of the person who once was just incredible.
It's so sad that Super Bowl was the last time that he was truly, I mean, not in that Super Bowl specifically, but like that season was the last time that he was truly great. That he would come out of that moment where he doesn't dive on the ball and he would never be the same.
Yeah.
And obviously this year was much worse than the previous years in Carolina. And he had some moments in Carolina before and after certain injuries where we thought, oh, maybe he'll bring that to the Patriots, but it just didn't happen.
You bring up something that sparked this idea that I've had for a while when you say that was the last time we truly saw his greatness. I hope fans of football right now, and really sports in general, don't take for granted the incredible players that we're watching right now, because there are some players who are truly legendary status right now. Like Derrick Henry, for example. I hope we don't take him for granted, because what he has done the last, 2 seasons or so is like the stuff of legends. He's put teams on his back. You have defensive players like Aaron Donald, who I had a friend say to me, Aaron Donald is better at football than Mike Trout is at baseball. And that's kind of a true thing when you think about it. And I just hope that I think you can make an argument that in many ways the product on the play right now is kind of like a golden era for football. We are at such a high level of play where players are, so smart, they're so strong, they're so fast, it's so much fun to watch. And I hope we don't take that for granted, because it probably won't be around forever.
Totally agree.
Now back to a sour note. My disappointing player this year. We already talked about Carson Wentz, so I'm not really going to go over him much more. But Jared Goff was really disappointing for me.
Yeah.
The Rams as a whole were kind of ended up being what we thought they were, like a team that won games but really wasn't that great of a team. I have a good friend who's a Rams fan, and I was texting with him throughout the season, and I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to get out of the Rams every week. They'll play 2 games where they look like they're maybe Super Bowl contenders, and then 2 games where they get beat by Nick Mullins, and it's just like, what's going on here? And Goff in particular, Goff is a player who at times has had certain games where he shows us that, okay, this is why the Rams gave him this big contract extension, because he gives them a real good shot to win every game. And then he has games where he's turning the ball over 3 or 4 times, just making horrible reads, doesn't have a strong arm, and I don't know.
I never bought the hype on Jared Goff, but again, a lot of that was personal bias because the son of a bitch went to MC and we went to Terra Linda. Yeah, his play it just wasn't good. It seems like there's a confidence issue also. It seems like McVay has to really tread lightly when he's dealing with Jared Goff.
Yeah, he and Carson Wentz are guys who got signed to extensions a year early, and the teams are really regretting it right now. And that's a whole other topic for a different day, quarterbacks and when you sign them, how you build a team. But yeah, those teams are definitely regretting those decisions at this moment.
My last disappointing player, I just wanted to mention because, well, it's Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah.
I think that for the most part, it's a little bit overblown how bad he was this year. But at the same time, when you're getting paid that much money, it is a disappointing season. So in terms of disappointing players, yes, he falls into that category. Is he out of the top 20 running backs now? No, of course not. But he had 6 fumbles, and also, he's kind of been a fumbler. He's fumbled a lot over his career. He had under 1,000 yards. His numbers actually really closely resemble his sophomore year when he missed, I think, 6 games. I think he played in 10 games, and then in this year it was 15 or 16 games, and the numbers are almost identical, which is scary.
Yeah, I'm looking at him right now. That's kind of whack.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it was a disappointing season, especially when your quarterback goes down and you need to be the guy that carries this offense, especially because you're getting paid to carry the offense. I don't want to go too harsh because, it wasn't an atrocious season. He caught the ball a fair amount of times and picked up, I don't know, 300 to 500 yards or something like that.
338.
There you go. Was it atrocious? No. Was it bad? Yeah, for his standards and for the standards of that contract.
Yeah, I think the contract is the big part of it. I mean, he signed a $90 million contract just a year ago, and he did not look good this year. Definitely. He was so unforgettable this year, really. I completely forgot about him. I didn't even think about including him on my disappointing players list because he just did not cross my mind.
Multiple times throughout the season, it was the same thing for me. I thought that he was also injured. I thought he and Dak just went out together.
On that note, I want to go just quickly through some award picks for this year. Maybe not the players who you necessarily think will win them, but players you think should win them. I feel like a lot of these players were already going to have slightly touched on earlier, so we'll keep this pretty brief here. MVP, who are you thinking for that one?
This is the first year where I don't care that much. It's between Rodgers and Mahomes. I don't think you can make a super compelling argument for too many other players. So I'll just say that those two are really who you gotta pick between. And if I'm picking between them, I mean, it's so similar and so close. The argument is Patrick Mahomes has more yards. Aaron Rodgers, he was that offense, but it's the first time where I'm just like, if either guy wins it, I'm perfectly fine with it.
Yeah, I think Rodgers and Mahomes are the clear-cut two guys who are going to be in that conversation. And then I think you can throw Brady in there as well, just what he did for that team. I think you can make an argument for him, albeit not as strong as Rodgers and Mahomes. And then if you want to throw a non-quarterback in there, I think Derrick Henry deserves some respect. There's not really many other running backs who I think can take over a game. There's other running backs who can have productive games in like incredible statistical days, but there's very few guys like Henry who I think you could be like, yeah, this is the reason we're going to win the game today.
With Derrick Henry, because I also have him in my Offensive Player of the Year spot, him and a couple other guys. But with Derrick Henry, he's a guy where you have to game plan against him, and then you have to game plan in the game because he's beaten your game plan because he's just so physically dominant. That's kind of a mark of an MVP also, I think, is like you game plan all week for Mahomes, you game plan all week for Rodgers, and then they show up and they still torch you. And then Derrick Henry's the same way. He rushed for 2,000 yards this year. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Insane. Derrick Henry was another player who won me a lot of money on DraftKings this year, not a sponsor. Really just someone I was scared to not play every week. So I just played him every single week I could. Moving on here, down the list, Defensive Player of the Year. Who are you thinking for this one?
I would like to just offer up Aaron Donald for the sake of that he is one of the best defensive players of all time. So just, always have him in the conversation. But there were times during the season where he looked banged up and he looked like he was getting, of course, Daddy Brunskill, as we talked about.
Daddy Dan Brunskill.
Just shut him down for an entire game. And that kind of ruined his entire chance, in my opinion, for winning Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah.
So I guess, again, this is kind of a lame take, but I guess TJ Watt is my Defensive Player of the Year.
Okay.
Just because I think statistically, one of the more impressive years, led the league in sacks, 15 sacks, and I think it was 15 games. He had 7 pass defenses, so he swatted the ball 7 times. And he had 26 tackles for a loss, which was, again, leading the league in the NFL, as opposed to the NBA.
As opposed to the MLS.
Yeah. There's a number of guys, though. It depends on like how you define Defensive Player of the Year, because often it's defined by dominance.
That's kind of like, rest in peace, but Nick Bosa.
Yeah.
Last year, where it's like he's not getting sacks, but he's just giving everyone else single teams or no teams in some cases. Really quick Nick Bosa fun fact. I saw a statistic yesterday that said over the last 2 years, Frank Clark is tied for first in the NFL in playoff QB pressures with 22. He is tied for that number with Nick Bosa, who did not play in the playoffs this year and had 22 QB pressures in the playoffs last year. Absolutely insane.
We miss him.
I love that man. He is so good. My Defensive Player of the Year candidates, TJ Watt is on my short list. Aaron Donald's on there. My number one guy, I think, is Xavier Howard.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, 10 interceptions this year. Definitely, I think, deserves credit for that. Someone who's absolutely not going to win it, but I just want to throw out there, and maybe it's a bit of a homer pick, but Fred Warner is so phenomenal.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's totally fair.
Like, I think there's been actually a lot of good linebackers in our, lifetime of watching football. But I think he's right up there with like Luke Kuechly and Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman, Bobby Wagner, those type of guys. Like he's incredible. He makes plays every single week. He's literally all over the field. You'll see him, go in coverage on the slot wide receiver going deep. You'll see him blitzing, and he's great at all of it. And I don't have his numbers in front of me, but I think he deserves, maybe a honorable mention for this category.
Absolutely agree. Like I said, how you impact the game, how dominant you are. That's kind of how we define defensive player of the year, because there's so many statistics. I mean, with Xavier Howard also, like with 10 interceptions, he should be like a top 2, top 3 guy on everybody's list. But there's a number of lists when I was researching that he just wasn't even on, which is insane. The way that we value sacks over interceptions, even though interceptions are far more impactful than sacks are. Definitely Xavier Howard as well. But yeah, with Fred Warner, he flies from sideline to sideline, unlike any linebacker in the NFL. And also, he's just like of football genius intellect. Yep. And that's something that's pretty hard to measure. And you can't give somebody a defensive player of the year just based on that. But like, if there was just a pure X's and O's award, I think Fred Warner could possibly win that as well. Yeah.
Offensive player of the year. Who you got?
It's Derrick Henry, it's Patrick Mahomes, and it's Deshaun Watson.
Mm-hmm.
Deshaun Watson had, I think he led the league in all-purpose yards. Just a truly impressive season. Just a truly impressive statistical season. And and I think Rodgers is going to win the MVP, so I have a general rule that you give one of the two guys the offensive player of the year and the other one the MVP, unless the season is so ridiculous that you have to just like double down on it. So if Rodgers is winning MVP, then I'd like Mahomes probably to win offensive player of the year. But again, Derrick Henry, there's a quarterback bias on these awards. So I do think Derrick Henry was the most impressive offensive player this year. So if I was awarding it, I think I would give it to Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I think those guys are all great picks. Two other ones I want to throw out there. Alvin Kamara was really great all year long. And then Travis Kelce, too, I think would be on my short list of guys. Phenomenal year for him. Phenomenal player. That brings us to the Young Guns. Defensive Rookie of the Year and Offensive Rookie of the Year. We talked about how great this rookie class was, but who was the top amongst them this year?
Instinctually, you think Justin Herbert, and I do think he had a very good season, but I keep getting pulled towards Justin Jefferson. I want to give Justin Jefferson the award. I think what he did was just so insane, how remarkably effective he was, just statistically even. And then another guy also, Jonathan Taylor, who nobody knows. I went about halfway through the season without even thinking about Jonathan Taylor. And then all of a sudden I looked at some leaders in rushing and I was like, wait, Jonathan Taylor is like second in the NFL right now in rushing. So in both of those two cases, Justin Jefferson and Taylor, they were both over 1,000 yards. They were both the best at their position for rookies. And then Justin Herbert was probably the best, definitely the best rookie quarterback because Joe Burrow went down. I'm giving it to Justin Jefferson. That's my guy. That's my pick.
That's a good pick. I think those are all worthy nominees. I'm going off the board with this one. And this is one that absolutely will not happen because he does not have statistics. But Tristan Wirfs, the right tackle for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, played at an insane level this year. Defense, on the defense side, I'm thinking here, Chase Young is the obvious pick. Another guy who absolutely lived up to the hype coming out of the draft. People were saying he's better than the Bosa bros when they were coming out of Ohio State, who just seems to have this knack for producing incredible edge rushers.
Yeah.
The way he changed, he really gave that defense so much energy, and from everything I've read and heard, is just an absolutely incredible leader for that defense too. And the other guy I'm going to go with is Anton Winfield Jr., the safety for the Buccaneers. I was so high on this guy coming out of the draft. He was one of my favorite, second, third round guys who might be at the bottom of round one. There's this story that I think it was Levante David was saying on one of the shows, but he was talking about their first day at training camp this year, and they're doing their red zone practice, and he just hears someone yelling behind him and calling out defensive adjustments and stuff, and calling out the plays that are coming. And he turns around, and this guy, he had no idea who it was. He'd never met before. And it was Anton Winfield Jr. This kid's going to be special. He's going to be making these type of, all-pro lists for years to come.
It's impressive, too, because at the safety position, it's to have that kind of impact is really impressive.
Yeah.
Statistically, just go look it up for yourself, listener of this pod. Also, Patrick Queen, linebacker for the Ravens, really good, really strong rookie year. Jeremy Chin also.
Love Jeremy Chin.
Just great. Just a great season. So between all of those guys that we just mentioned, I think it's another category where I'm just like, we're just so spoiled with all of these incredible players. So if anyone wins it, I'll be happy. But I think the obvious pick is Chase Young. I think he'll go home with the award.
Coach of the year, I'm going Brian Flores for mine. I know that they didn't make the playoffs, but I talked about earlier, the way he gets his guys to buy in every single week was just truly impressive. Probably him or Kevin Stefanski, I think, are the guys who deserve that award.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of hype for Sean McDermott as well, but the only reason, and maybe this is a bad reason, but they were really good last year as well,
mm-hmm.
and so I think that the award usually is kind of like who surprised us the most.
Yeah,
it's like you either go 16-0 or you're out of nowhere, and so for that reason, yeah, I think Stefanski and Flores are kind of running away with it. I think I'd give it to. I think I'll give it to Stefanski. I think what he did was pretty darn impressive.
It was a long season. This has been a long pod. We're going to make it just a little bit longer here. We got one last thing to talk about. It's going to be a fascinating off-season. What is your biggest off-season storyline that you are looking forward to?
I guess I'm cheating because this is a storyline that stretches across the entire NFL, but it's the QB reshuffling.
There we go. That's the one.
We've talked about this for many years. The great QB swap. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going anywhere. I think he's more likely to retire than to be traded. I think if they threatened to trade him, he would probably retire the same way that like Gronkowski did when they said that he was going to Detroit. So I think that position is fine. Stafford's going to get moved.
They've already agreed to do that.
They've already agreed. Jimmy's always on the hot seat. We'll see if that ends up happening. Jimmy Garoppolo for non-Niner
mm-hmm.
heads. And then just there's like 1,000 other quarterbacks, so I won't actually go through all of them. But I
will though, because I made a quick little tier list here of the guys. I'm gonna go quickly through this, but the tier 1 guys, the real game changers. Aaron Rodgers, if he, requests a trade. Deshaun Watson has very clearly stated that he wants out, and the reports are it doesn't really matter who they hire for the head coach now. He's just done with that organization. Would be a historic move. We've never seen a quarterback really force his way out of a team that he was already signed to, especially a young star quarterback. Please come to the 49ers. My next tier of guys are the guys who are very, very good, but not that top level guys, and that's Dak Prescott, who's a free agent. Cowboys, I think, will most likely re-sign him, but you never know with Jerry. And then Matthew Stafford. Good old Jerry. And then Matthew Stafford, who you mentioned, they've already mutually agreed to part ways. Tier 3 for me is this really incredible draft class that we have of quarterbacks. I've only just started digging into the film on them, but you got Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, and I'll throw Trey Lance in there too, who are like the top 4 in this class, who are all superbly high upside players. Next on that list, I got my guys who you can win with, but not necessarily because of, and that's Jimmy G. Kirk Cousins I put on this list because I'm not convinced the Vikings are sold on him. Jared Goff, who I think would be... Jared Goff and Carson Wentz are both here. And then finally, I got my tier 5 guys, who the guys who it's like, they're either okay or you don't really know what you're going to get with them. And that's Sam Darnold, Jameis Winston, Jacoby Brissett, Cam Newton, Andy Dalton, and Mitch Trubisky. Oh boy. So we got a lot of quarterbacks who may potentially be on the move this year. which is funny because before this season, we were talking about how we thought like most teams had were like kind of set at quarterback, which is why you saw guys like Jameis and Cam struggle to find, work. And now it seems like the opposite, where it's like half the league doesn't really know who their quarterback's going to be next year.
Yeah, and in terms of specific teams that I think are going to could make the splashiest attempts at some of these quarterbacks, the Patriots, you got to include. They have shown that they're not willing to make that many big moves, so it's possible that Bill's just like, Jarrett's did him for all of next season. But I think that they would be foolish to not be in talks for like Matt Stafford, Derek Carr, even got Carson Wentz, even if you want to go there. And then earlier we talked about the Colts. The Colts, I think, are the best spot for any of these quarterbacks to go. Deshaun's not going to get traded in the AFC unless somebody has just a stupid offer.
Especially not the AFC South.
Right. Exactly.
Like the Colts ain't getting Deshaun. We all know that. Or we should all know that at least.
Exactly. So that's not going to happen. But the Colts are one of the most interesting teams going forward. And that's one of the teams that you really, if you're not a Colts fan, you should still be watching during the offseason to see what moves they make, because they are very close. They're right on the cusp.
I think that wraps it up. This was a really fun season, I thought. There was some stupid stuff with COVID that the NFL did, which we didn't even get into because there was so much other stuff that went on. I'm excited for the Super Bowl. This is coming out, I think, the Wednesday before the Super Bowl. We're recording this the Monday after the championship games. Have a good time. Order yourself some wings. Eat some chips and guac and some salsa and all that good stuff. Enjoy it. It's going to be one of those games where, I hope it lives up to the hype, because the matchup is truly like a matchup of legendary proportions.
Absolutely. And speaking of ordering wings, make sure to support your local restaurants for the Super Bowl. They're struggling and COVID persists.
Yes, this episode is brought to you by Mauna Loa Hawaiian Barbecue in San Rafael, California, as well as Original Buffalo Wings. Great places that we love.
Hey, before we go, this is Daniel checking in from the editing bay. In between the recording of this podcast and the release of this podcast, a pretty big trade happened. Matt Stafford for Jared Goff, 2 first-round picks and a third-round pick. So that's pretty insane. Jack and I have been texting about this off and on for the last couple of days, and we're pretty much in agreement that, the Rams, they came in, they overpaid 2 first-round picks and a third-round pick, and Jared Goff for Matt Stafford. That's definitely overpaying, but you got to also consider that they are better than they were now. They're a better team with Matt Stafford at quarterback. If you're not that familiar with Matt Stafford, I've been a big Matt Stafford fan since his sophomore year, where he just put up these gaudy numbers. If you haven't really given the Lions much time over the last few years, please go and just watch the highlights of Matt Stafford. In particular, there's an NFL Films clip. It's the longest unedited clip in NFL Films history. It's like 4 minutes long. It's a clip of Matt Stafford getting injured. He hurts his shoulder. He has to come out of the game. Then he runs over to the sideline. He's like squealing in pain, and then he runs back onto the field and wins the game for the Lions. It's pretty unbelievable. But he does a lot of the stuff that Patrick Mahomes does and some of these other great quarterbacks do. He has escapability. He has the ability to contort his arm when he's throwing, so he can make these weird 3-quarter release and sidearm release throws, just the way that Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers do. So Matt Stafford is definitely a really good quarterback, and I'm thrilled that he's getting an opportunity to win some games. I'm not thrilled, and neither is Jack, that he's now in our division and that the 49ers now have the worst quarterback in the division. Also, just from the front office perspective, the 2 first-round picks and the third-round pick, that is overpaying for Matt Stafford, but that's not really the price of Matt Stafford. That's the price of dumping Jared Goff's contract. And it also speaks to what we were talking about earlier in this podcast with the idea of fans overvaluing first-round picks. The Rams have not had a first-round pick since they took Jared Goff in 2016, and they will not have one through 2023 unless they make another trade for a first-round pick. And yet here they are, competitive every year. So we both think that the Rams are in a better position than they were 2 weeks ago. Now, on the other side of the trade, I don't love Jared Goff. Jack does not love Jared Goff. But for some reason now, I'm almost kind of rooting for him to be successful in Detroit. And while he might not be the Lions guy, he'll certainly have a shot to prove that he has a place in the NFL. And he's still young. So I think that this trade kind of actually is a big win for both teams. Even though Jared Goff is not your guy of the future, most likely, you're getting 2 first-round picks and a third-round pick and decent quarterback play while you're rebuilding and while you're probably developing a young quarterback that you take in this year's draft or next year's draft. So just wanted to throw that in there. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. We have more podcasts coming out every single Wednesday. We are committed to getting better at this and to having a regular upload schedule. So every Wednesday, we're going to upload something new, hopefully something better each week, and we hope you enjoy it. So thank you for listening.